All right, IB Math AISL2. We've made it to the end of our sinusoid unit. It wasn't too long a journey. Let's talk about everything that could come up on a sinusoid assessment. The first thing we did in the chapter is I showed you guys how to graph sine and cosine on a graphing calculator. We mostly did this on a TI-84, 83. Please make sure your calculator is in degree mode. Remember, we did not do radians ever in this unit, so you should always be in degree mode. You should know how to adjust your window. I think that's the hardest part of graphing these problems, is figuring out where the top and the bottom of the graph will be and then what the domain is. A lot of times the domain is 0 to 360, but there's other problems like word problems that came up where the domain was not 0 to 360. The domain was like 0 to 12 because it was 12 months or something like that. You should definitely know how to solve an equation by graphing both sides and seeing where a line intersects a sinusoidal function. There's usually multiple times where a line crosses a sinusoid, so you might have to run intersect a couple times on a problem. Now, graphing them by hand, I showed you guys that if you want to find the amplitude, you take the max, you subtract the min, and then you divide by 2. Remember, the amplitude is from the bottom from the middle of the curve up to the top. And amplitudes can never be negative, although you can have a negative a value out in front. Yeah, the amplitude corresponds with the a value in front of the equation. That could be for sine or cosine. The principal axis is the line that cuts directly through the middle of the curve. You can find that by doing the maximum plus the minimum and then dividing by 2. It's like the average of the maximum and minimum. That letter is the plus d that's on the end of both the sine and the cosine equations. Then the period has to do with the b value, but it's not exactly the b value. The b value is how many sinusoids fit into 360. Another way to say fit into 360 is 360 divided by b. That is your b value here inside attached to the x. One thing I forgot to put on here, but I would also know, are the parent curves. For sine and cosine. Remember, sine goes mountain, then valley. Cosine starts at the top of the mountain, then goes into the valley, and then back up the mountain. The last section of this chapter, we were looking at taking real-world situations and translating them into sinusoids. So if you start with a graph, you should be able to take that graph and come up with either a y equals a sine bx or a y equals, I forgot a couple things there, a cosine bx plus d. Using those same tricks up here, like, the maximum and minimum, that you can find the amplitude, the principal axis, and then you can find the b value if you know the period. You can set the period equal to 360 over b. Another way to do that is to take a table and find all those same things. But I think part of that is sketching the table, so plotting the points to see what the points look like. So if for instance, it looks something like this, I would say that's an upside down sine curve. If it looks something like this, I would say that's a cosine curve. So yeah, you have to kind of plot it to see what it looks like and decide whether you're using a sine or a cosine. And remember, if they are upside down, that means your a value is going to be negative. That doesn't mean it's a negative amplitude, but yeah, it could be a negative value out in front. I believe that is the last thing we did in this chapter. Yeah, happy studying.